September 1942, Stalingrad. A Soviet sergeant and 3 soldiers hold a single apartment building against an entire German battalion for 58 days. Across the Volga River, the city burns. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier arriving in Stalingrad is 24 hours. German troops fight room to room, floor to floor, sometimes mere meters from the enemy. This is not a battle. This is industrialized slaughter. Welcome to Stalingrad, the meat grinder that devoured Hitler's army and changed the course of World War II. Over the next 200 days, 2 million men will fight for control of a city that has become a symbol neither side can afford to lose. By February 1943, an entire German army will cease to exist. This is the complete story of the battle that broke the Wehrmacht. Stalingrad, August 1942. The city stretches for 30 miles along the western bank of the Volga River, a vital industrial center producing tanks, artillery, and ammunition for the Soviet war effort. Its factories, the Red October steel plant, the Barricady gun factory, the Dzержinski tractor works, operate around the clock. But Stalingrad's strategic value pales beside its symbolic importance. The city bears Joseph Stalin's name. For Hitler, its capture would humiliate the Soviet dictator and secure the gateway to the Caucasus oil fields. For Stalin, its loss would be personal defeat. Neither dictator will permit retreat. By late summer 1942, Nazi Germany appears unstoppable. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, has driven deep into Soviet territory. Leningrad is under siege. Moscow has been threatened. Millions of Soviet soldiers are dead or captured. German Army Group South has swept across Ukraine toward the Caucasus, securing oil resources vital to Germany's war machine. But Hitler has made a critical decision. Instead of concentrating forces on a single objective, he has split Army Group South into 2 thrusts: Army Group A toward the Caucasus oil fields and Army Group B toward Stalingrad. General Friedrich Paulus commands the 6th Army, tasked with taking Stalingrad. Paulus is a meticulous staff officer, a protege of the German general staff system, known for careful planning rather than bold improvisation. His 6th Army is one of the Wehrmacht's most powerful formations. Approximately 270,000 men, supported by over 500 tanks and assault guns, backed by the Luftwaffe's 4th Air Fleet under General Wolfram von Richthofen. German confidence is high. Intelligence estimates suggest Soviet forces in the region are shattered and disorganized. Paulus expects to capture the city within weeks. Defending Stalingrad is General Vasily Chuikov, newly appointed commander of the Soviet 62nd Army. Chuikov is a hard-drinking, foul-mouthed combat veteran with a reputation for personal courage and tactical ruthlessness. He understands immediately that conventional defensive tactics will fail against German firepower. His solution is simple and brutal: hug the enemy. Soviet troops will close to within grenade-throwing distance of German forces, negating the Wehrmacht's advantage in artillery and air support. Chuikov's order to his troops is unambiguous: there is no land beyond the Volga. Retreat is not an option. Survival is not guaranteed. Victory is the only acceptable outcome. By mid-August, German forces are closing on Stalingrad from the west and north. Soviet civilians are evacuated across the Volga, though thousands remain trapped in the city. The Red Army fortifies buildings, digs trenches, lays mines, and prepares for urban combat. The stage is set for a confrontation unlike any battle in human history, a struggle measured not in miles, but in meters, not in days, but in lifetimes measured in hours. To understand Stalingrad, we must first understand Operation Blau, Case Blue, Hitler's grand offensive for 1942. After the failure to capture Moscow in December 1941 and the brutal Soviet winter counteroffensive, Hitler has abandoned the goal of destroying the Red Army in a single decisive blow. Instead, he focuses on economic targets: the oil fields of the Caucasus, the industrial cities of the Don Basin, and the transportation hub of Stalingrad. Control of Caucasus oil would fuel the German war machine while strangling the Soviet Union. Capturing Stalingrad would sever the Volga River, cutting Soviet supply lines and isolating southern Russia. Operation Blau begins on June 28, 1942. Army Group South, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock, attacks across a broad front from Kursk to Rostov. Initially, the offensive achieves spectacular success. Soviet forces, still recovering from catastrophic losses in 1941, conduct fighting retreats to avoid encirclement. German mechanized spearheads race across the open steppe, covering hundreds of miles in weeks. Rostov falls on July 23. The gateway to the Caucasus is open, but Hitler makes a fateful decision. On July 23, he issues Führer Directive No. 45, splitting Army Group South into two separate formations. Army Group A, under Field Marshal Wilhelm List, will drive into the Caucasus toward the Baku oil fields. Army Group B, under General Maximilian von Weichs, will advance on Stalingrad. This division of forces violates basic military principles of concentration and mass. Neither army group is strong enough to achieve its objective alone, yet they are too far apart to support each other. German logistics, already stretched across vast distances, begin to fracture. Army Group B's spearhead is Paulus's 6th Army, reinforced by elements of the 4th Panzer Army under General Hermann Hoth. By early August, German forces are approaching Stalingrad's outer defenses. Soviet resistance stiffens. The Red Army is learning. Stalin has issued Order No. 227, not one step back, on July 28. The order is brutally clear. Retreat without orders is treason, punishable by execution. Blocking detachments, composed of NKVD troops, are positioned behind frontline units with orders to shoot anyone who runs. Soviet commanders know that failure means death, either from German bullets or Soviet firing squads. On August 23, 1942, the German 16th Panzer Division reaches the Volga River north of Stalingrad, cutting the city off from the north. That same day, the Luftwaffe launches a massive air raid on Stalingrad. Over 600 German bombers drop incendiary and high-explosive bombs on the city center. Firestorms engulf residential districts. Wooden buildings disintegrate. Estimates suggest that 40,000 Soviet civilians are killed in a single day, more than died in the infamous Coventry Blitz of November 1940. The city burns. Smoke rises thousands of feet into the sky. German soldiers advancing from the West see the glow of fires reflected off the clouds at night. But the bombing, intended to break Soviet morale and destroy infrastructure, has an unintended consequence. The rubble creates defensive terrain. Collapsed buildings become fortresses. Shattered factories transform into labyrinths of steel and concrete. The Luftwaffe has inadvertently created the perfect battlefield for Soviet defenders. Urban combat favors the defender, especially one willing to die in place. The stage is set for a battle unlike any the Wehrmacht has ever fought. September 13, 1942. German forces launch their first major assault into central Stalingrad. 3 divisions, the 71st, 76th, and 295th Infantry Divisions, attack toward Mamiev Kurgan, a Tatar burial mound rising 102 meters above the city. Control of this hill means observation over the entire battlefield and artillery dominance of the Volga ferry crossings. Soviet forces defend the hill with fanatical intensity. The slope becomes a killing ground. German soldiers advance uphill into machine gun fire, mortar shells, and Katyusha rocket barrages. Soviet troops counterattack repeatedly, retaking lost positions in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The hill changes hands multiple times in a single day. Simultaneously, German forces push toward the central railway station, a key transportation hub near the Volga riverbank. The railway station becomes a microcosm of the entire battle. Soviet troops fortify the building with sandbags, wire, and mines. German infantry, supported by assault guns and flamethrowers, attack from multiple directions. The building changes hands 15 times in 6 hours. Soviet soldiers hide in basements and emerge to counterattack German troops consolidating upper floors. Grenades are thrown down stairwells, snipers shoot through walls. The railway station is finally captured by German forces on September 14, only to be retaken by a Soviet counterattack that night. General Chuikov's headquarters is located on the Volga riverbank, within German artillery range. He refuses to move it further from the front line, believing that proximity to the fighting is essential for command and control. Soviet reinforcements cross the Volga at night under German fire. Ferries are sunk, soldiers drown in the cold water. Those who reach the western bank are thrown immediately into combat, often without time to learn the names of their squad mates. The average life expectancy of a Soviet reinforcement arriving in Stalingrad is 24 hours. German tactics rely on overwhelming firepower. Infantry advances are preceded by artillery barrages and Stuka dive bomber attacks. Assault guns provide direct fire support, but in the rubble of Stalingrad, these advantages diminish. Tanks cannot maneuver through collapsed buildings. Artillery observers cannot see targets through smoke and dust. Air support struggles to distinguish friend from foe in close combat. Soviet defenders exploit these limitations. They allow German infantry to advance, then attack from basements, sewers, and rooftops. German soldiers describe the fighting as Rattenkrieg, rat warfare. Soviet snipers become legendary. The most famous is Vasily Zaitsev, credited with 225 confirmed kills during the battle. Zaitsev operates from concealed positions in the rubble, waiting hours or even days for high-value targets. His duels with German snipers are documented by Soviet propaganda, though some details are likely embellished. Nonetheless, Soviet snipers have a measurable impact on German morale. Officers and NCOs are targeted first. German soldiers learn not to salute officers in the open. Radio operators carrying conspicuous antennas become priority targets. Every movement in Stalingrad carries the risk of instant death. By the end of September, German forces control approximately 90% of Stalingrad. Soviet defenders cling to a narrow strip of land along the Volga, in some places only a few hundred meters wide. The 62nd Army is pressed against the river. German artillery commands the ferry crossings. Chuikov's headquarters is bombed repeatedly. Casualties are catastrophic on both sides, yet Soviet resistance does not collapse. New reinforcements arrive nightly. Ammunition and supplies are ferried across under fire. The Red Army absorbs losses that would shatter any other military force and continues fighting. The Wehrmacht is learning a brutal lesson. In Stalingrad, controlling territory does not mean controlling the battlefield. Late September 1942, Sergeant Yakov Pavlov leads a reconnaissance patrol into a 4-story apartment building overlooking the central square, approximately 300 meters from the Volga riverbank. The building, designated House 61 on Soviet military maps, provides excellent observation and fields of fire. Pavlov and his small squad, fewer than a dozen men, clear the building of German troops and fortify it. Over the following days, reinforcements arrive. By early October, Pavlov commands a mixed garrison of approximately 25 men, riflemen, machine gunners, mortar crews, and anti-tank gunners. The group includes soldiers from multiple Soviet nationalities: Russians, Ukrainians, Georgians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and Tatars, a microcosm of the multinational Red Army. They transform the apartment building into a fortress. The basement becomes a command post and ammunition dump. Machine gun positions are established in upper floor windows with overlapping fields of fire. Anti-tank rifles are positioned to cover approach routes. Mines are laid around the perimeter. Communication is maintained with Chuikov's headquarters via radio and runner. The building's location makes it strategically vital. It overlooks the 9th January Square and blocks German access to the Volga riverbank. German forces must capture or destroy Pavlov's house to complete their occupation of central Stalingrad. Repeated assaults are launched. Infantry attacks, supported by tanks and assault guns, attempt to storm the building. Soviet defenders repel each attack with machine gun fire, grenades, and Molotov cocktails. Anti-tank rifle crews disable German armor at close range. Mortar teams call down fire on German assembly areas. The rubble surrounding the building creates dead zones where German troops cannot advance without exposing themselves to Soviet fire. German frustration grows. Artillery and air strikes are called in. The building is reduced to a shell. Walls are blown apart. Floors collapse. Yet the defenders survive in the basement and continue fighting. At night, Soviet supply parties infiltrate through the rubble to deliver ammunition, food, and water. Wounded are evacuated back to the Volga. Fresh troops rotate in. The garrison's resistance becomes symbolic. Soviet propaganda refers to the structure as Pavlov's house, elevating Sergeant Pavlov to the status of a national hero. For 58 days, Pavlov's house holds. German forces expend more ammunition attempting to capture a single apartment building than they used to conquer entire European nations in 1940. The defense of Pavlov's house illustrates the fundamental dynamics of the Stalingrad battle. Determination and tactical ingenuity can offset material disadvantages. A few dozen soldiers, properly positioned and supplied, can tie down entire battalions. Urban combat negates the Wehrmacht's operational advantages. The initiative belongs to the defender. Pavlov's house is finally relieved in late November when Soviet counteroffensives encircle the German Sixth Army. Sergeant Yakov Pavlov survives the battle and is later awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the USSR's highest decoration. The building itself is rebuilt after the war and still stands today, bearing a memorial plaque commemorating the defenders. Pavlov's house remains one of the most iconic symbols of Soviet resistance in World War II, proof that willpower can triumph over firepower. October 1942. The battle shifts north to Stalingrad's industrial district. Three massive factory complexes, the Red October steel plant, the Barricady gun factory, and the Dzержinski tractor works, become the focus of German operations. These factories are not merely industrial sites. They are fortified urban terrain, unlike anything German forces have encountered. Multi-story workshops, blast furnaces, warehouses, and rail yards create a three-dimensional labyrinth of steel, concrete, and rubble. Soviet defenders transform assembly lines into firing positions. Overhead cranes become observation posts. Foundry pits become bunkers. The fighting in the factories is among the most savage of the entire battle. German infantry, supported by combat engineers and assault guns, attack through workshops where visibility is measured in meters. Soviet troops defend from behind machinery, inside furnaces, and beneath conveyor belts. Grenade duels occur across factory floors. Flamethrowers are used to clear rooms. Satchel charges demolish walls. The noise is deafening. Machine gun fire, explosions, collapsing structures, and the screams of wounded men echo through enclosed spaces. The Red October steel plant becomes a particular focus. German forces penetrate the factory complex multiple times, only to be driven back by Soviet counterattacks. In some areas, German troops control the ground floor, while Soviet troops hold upper floors. Fighting occurs vertically, with both sides dropping grenades through holes in ceilings and floors. Snipers position themselves in catwalks and shoot down into enemy positions. The plant changes hands section by section, sometimes room by room. Soviet reinforcements arrive at night via the Volga and immediately enter combat. German exhaustion increases. Units that began the battle at full strength are reduced to fractions of their authorized manpower. By late October, German offensive momentum stalls. The Sixth Army has sustained over 40,000 casualties since September. Infantry companies are reduced to 30 or 40 men. Ammunition expenditure is unsustainable. German logistics cannot keep pace with consumption. Soviet artillery, positioned on the eastern bank of the Volga, pounds German positions with impunity. German counter-battery fire is ineffective because Soviet guns are beyond the range of German artillery on the western bank. The Volga becomes a one-way shooting gallery. Soviet losses are equally catastrophic. The 62nd Army has been reinforced multiple times, yet its effective strength hovers around 50,000 troops. Entire divisions have been destroyed and rebuilt. Regiments exist on paper but field battalion-sized forces. Yet the Red Army adapts. Small assault groups, typically 8 to 10 men armed with submachine guns, grenades, and satchel charges, conduct raids on German positions. These storm groups exploit cover, move at night, and strike without warning. German soldiers, trained for open-terrain maneuver warfare, struggle to counter Soviet tactics in the close confines of urban combat. By early November, the temperature drops. Winter is approaching. German soldiers, still dressed in summer uniforms, suffer from exposure. Frostbite cases increase. Supply difficulties worsen as mud and ice make roads impassable. Meanwhile, Soviet forces are accustomed to winter warfare and better equipped. The psychological balance shifts. German morale, sustained by the expectation of imminent victory, begins to erode. Soldiers write letters home describing Stalingrad as hell on earth and the city of death. The Wehrmacht, accustomed to rapid victories, is learning the cost of attrition warfare. While the world's attention focuses on the street fighting in Stalingrad, Soviet High Command is planning a strategic masterstroke. General Georgy Zhukov, the Red Army's most accomplished commander, and General Alexander Vasilevsky, chief of the Soviet General Staff, have conceived Operation Uranus, a massive double envelopment designed to encircle the entire German Sixth Army. The plan exploits a critical German weakness. The flanks of Army Group B are held by allied Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian forces, equipped with inferior weapons and lacking the mobility and firepower of German units. Soviet preparations are meticulous and secretive. Over 1 million troops, 13,500 artillery pieces, 900 tanks, and 1,100 aircraft are concentrated north and south of Stalingrad. Soviet deception operations, Maskirovka, disguise the buildup. Troop movements occur at night. Radio silence is enforced. Dummy positions are constructed to confuse German reconnaissance. Soviet intelligence monitors German communications and identifies weak points in the Axis line. The Red Army is no longer the disorganized force of 1941. It has learned from catastrophic defeats and emerged as a competent, increasingly effective fighting force. November 19, 1942, 7:30 a.m. Operation Uranus begins. Soviet artillery unleashes a devastating barrage on Romanian positions northwest of Stalingrad. Over 3,500 guns fire for 80 minutes. The Romanian Third Army, holding a 140-kilometer front with inadequate anti-tank weapons, disintegrates under the onslaught. Soviet Mechanized Corps, the 5th Tank Army under General Romanenko, and the 21st Army under General Kistiakov pour through the breach. Romanian units retreat in disorder. German reserves are too far away to intervene effectively. By nightfall on November 19, Soviet forces have advanced 40 kilometers. The northern arm of the encirclement is in motion. November 20, 1942, the southern pincer attacks. The 51st and 57th Soviet armies, commanded by Generals Trufanov and Tolbukin, strike Romanian positions south of Stalingrad. The Romanian Fourth Army collapses. Soviet tank corps exploit the breakthrough and race northwest. German forces attempt to contain the penetration but lack sufficient reserves. The southern and northern Soviet spearheads drive toward each other, converging on the town of Kalach, a key crossing point on the Don River west of Stalingrad. November 23, 1942. Forward elements of the 21st and 51st Soviet armies link up near Kalach. The encirclement is complete. The German Sixth Army, approximately 290,000 men, including attached Romanian and Croatian units, is trapped in a pocket roughly 50 kilometers wide and 40 kilometers deep, centered on Stalingrad. Paulus requests permission to break out. Hitler refuses. The Führer orders the Sixth Army to hold Stalingrad at all costs. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring assures Hitler that the Luftwaffe can supply the Sixth Army by air, delivering 500 tons of supplies per day. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. The Luftwaffe lacks the transport capacity, weather conditions are deteriorating, and Soviet air defenses are improving. The encircled Sixth Army is doomed. The Germans call it Der Kessel, the cauldron. The Sixth Army is trapped. Initial confidence gives way to grim realization. The Luftwaffe cannot deliver promised supplies. Transport aircraft are shot down by Soviet fighters or forced to land at makeshift airstrips under artillery fire. Daily supply deliveries average 100 tons, 1/5 of the minimum required. Food rations are cut. Ammunition is rationed. Medical supplies run out. Wounded soldiers lie in makeshift hospitals without anesthesia or antibiotics. Frostbite and typhus spread. Horses are slaughtered for food. By late December, German soldiers are starving. Soviet forces tighten the noose. The Red Army attacks the pocket from all directions, compressing German defenders into an ever-shrinking perimeter. German counterattacks to relieve the Sixth Army fail. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Army Group Don launches Operation Winter Storm in mid-December, attempting to break through Soviet lines and establish a relief corridor. Manstein's forces advance to within 48 kilometers of the pocket before being halted by Soviet counterattacks. Paulus is ordered to break out and link up with Manstein's forces, Operation Thunderclap, but the Sixth Army lacks the fuel, ammunition, and strength to conduct a breakout. The order is never executed. Manstein's forces withdraw. The Sixth Army is abandoned. Inside the pocket, discipline erodes. German soldiers, once the embodiment of military professionalism, become hollow-eyed scarecrows. Morale collapses, desertions increase. Some German soldiers attempt to surrender individually. They are often shot by Soviet troops unwilling to take prisoners. Others commit suicide. Paulus radios increasingly desperate reports to Berlin, describing catastrophic conditions and pleading for permission to surrender. Hitler responds with propaganda. The Sixth Army's sacrifice is buying time for Germany to regroup. Paulus is promoted to Field Marshal on January 30, 1943, a cynical gesture, as no German Field Marshal has ever surrendered. The implication is clear. Paulus is expected to die in place. January 8, 1943, Soviet forces offer surrender terms. Paulus is promised humane treatment for his men, medical care for the wounded, and repatriation after the war. Hitler forbids acceptance. The offer is rejected. Soviet forces resume the offensive. On January 10, Operation Ring begins, a final assault to liquidate the pocket. 7 Soviet armies, supported by massed artillery and air power, attack simultaneously. German defenses crumble. The pocket splits into 2 smaller pockets. Soviet troops advance through frozen ruins. German resistance is sporadic. Entire battalions surrender without firing a shot. January 31, 1943. Paulus, now a field marshal for less than 48 hours, surrenders his headquarters in the basement of a department store in central Stalingrad. He refuses Hitler's implicit expectation of suicide. On February 2, the last German resistance ceases. Approximately 91,000 German and Romanian soldiers are captured, including 22 generals. Most are emaciated, frostbitten, and suffering from disease. Over 150,000 German soldiers have died in the pocket since November, killed in combat, dead from starvation, frozen to death, or succumbed to disease. Soviet casualties in the encirclement and reduction of the pocket exceed 450,000. The Battle of Stalingrad is over. The numbers are staggering. Estimates vary, but the generally accepted figures are as follows. Axis losses: approximately 850,000 troops killed, wounded, or captured, including the destruction of the German Sixth Army and significant losses to Italian, Romanian, and Hungarian forces. Soviet losses: approximately 1.1 million troops killed, wounded, or captured, plus hundreds of thousands of civilian dead. Over 2 million combatants fought in and around Stalingrad between August 1942 and February 1943. The city itself is obliterated. 90% of the buildings are destroyed. The Volga riverbank is littered with wrecks of ships, ferries, and barges. Thousands of unburied corpses lie frozen in the ruins. The German prisoners face a grim fate. Of the 91,000 men captured, only approximately 6,000 survive Soviet captivity to return to Germany in the 1950s. Most die within months of capture from typhus, dysentery, and malnutrition. Soviet prison camps are unprepared for the influx of prisoners. Medical care is minimal. Food is scarce. The Soviet Union, itself devastated by war, has little sympathy for captured invaders. German soldiers who besieged Leningrad, burned Ukrainian villages, and executed Soviet civilians receive no mercy in captivity. Field Marshal Paulus spends the remainder of the war in Soviet captivity. He initially refuses to cooperate with Soviet authorities, but eventually joins the National Committee for a Free Germany, a Soviet-sponsored organization of German POWs opposed to Hitler. Paulus's defection is a propaganda victory for the Soviet Union, but does little to change his personal fate. He is not repatriated to Germany until 1953, after Stalin's death, and settles in East Germany, where he dies in 1957. For Germany, Stalingrad is a catastrophe. The Sixth Army, one of the Wehrmacht's most powerful formations, has been annihilated. German losses in trained manpower, especially NCOs and junior officers, are irreplaceable. The myth of German military invincibility, cultivated through rapid victories in Poland, France, and the Balkans, is shattered. German civilians, subjected to Nazi propaganda proclaiming inevitable victory, learn that their army has suffered a devastating defeat. Morale on the home front declines. Goebbels's propaganda machine attempts to spin Stalingrad as a heroic last stand, but the German public is not fooled. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad is a turning point. The Red Army has defeated the Wehrmacht in a major battle, encircled and destroyed an entire German army, and demonstrated that Nazi Germany can be beaten. Soviet morale soars. Stalin's leadership, questioned after the disasters of 1941, is vindicated. The industrial might of the Soviet Union, factories relocated east of the Urals, producing tanks, artillery, and aircraft in vast quantities, proves decisive. The Red Army will never again retreat on the scale of 1941 to 1942. From Stalingrad onward, the tide of war shifts inexorably against Germany. Strategically, Stalingrad marks the end of German offensive capability in the east. Hitler will launch one more major offensive, Operation Citadel at Kursk, in July 1943, but it will fail. After Kursk, Germany is permanently on the defensive. The Red Army begins the long, brutal march westward toward Berlin. The road from Stalingrad to the Reichstag will take over 2 years and cost millions of lives, but the outcome is no longer in doubt. The Battle of Stalingrad offers profound lessons in military strategy, tactics, and leadership. First, the importance of urban terrain. German doctrine emphasized maneuver warfare, rapid penetration, encirclement, and destruction of enemy forces in open terrain. Stalingrad negated these advantages. Urban combat favors the defender, especially one willing to trade casualties for time. Soviet forces exploited rubble, buildings, and close-quarter fighting to neutralize German firepower. The Wehrmacht, trained for blitzkrieg, struggled to adapt. Second, the principle of concentration of force. Hitler's decision to split Army Group South into 2 divergent objectives, Stalingrad and the Caucasus, violated basic military doctrine. Neither force was strong enough to achieve its objective independently, yet they were too far apart to support each other. This operational error created the conditions for Soviet counteroffensive. Had German forces concentrated on a single objective, the outcome might have been different. Third, logistics and supply. The Sixth Army's encirclement became irreversible when the Luftwaffe failed to deliver promised supplies. Goering's assurance that air supply could sustain the Sixth Army was based on fantasy, not reality. Modern mechanized armies consume vast quantities of fuel, ammunition, and food. When logistical lines are severed, combat effectiveness collapses rapidly. The Sixth Army's slow death in the Kessel was as much a logistical failure as a tactical defeat. Fourth, the role of intelligence and deception. Soviet Maskirovka successfully concealed the buildup of forces for Operation Uranus. German intelligence failed to detect or adequately assess Soviet preparations. This failure allowed the Red Army to achieve operational surprise, a critical factor in the success of the encirclement. Effective deception multiplies combat power by catching the enemy off guard. Fifth, the importance of morale and leadership. Soviet commanders like Chuikov and Zhukov demonstrated flexibility, resilience, and tactical creativity. They adapted to German methods and developed effective countermeasures. Soviet soldiers, despite horrific casualties, continued fighting. The Red Army's willingness to absorb losses and continue operations contrasts sharply with Western military traditions that prioritize casualty minimization. Whether this reflects ideological commitment, fear of punishment, or simple desperation is debatable, but the operational effect is undeniable. Conversely, German leadership at the strategic level, Hitler's refusal to allow retreat, Goering's false promises, and the failure to authorize breakout, doomed the Sixth Army. Paulus, a competent staff officer, lacked the audacity to disobey Hitler and order a breakout on his own authority. German military culture, which emphasized obedience and discipline, became a liability when strategic decisions were made by an ideologically driven dictator rather than professional soldiers. Finally, Stalingrad illustrates the cost of symbolic objectives. Both Hitler and Stalin elevated the city beyond its strategic value. The battle became a test of wills, with neither side willing to concede defeat. The result was industrialized slaughter on a scale unprecedented even in World War II. Over 2 million combatants fought for a city that, by the battle's end, no longer existed. The ruins of Stalingrad became a monument to the human cost of totalitarian pride. Stalingrad changed World War II. Before Stalingrad, Germany appeared capable of defeating the Soviet Union. After Stalingrad, the question was not whether Germany would lose, but when. The battle demonstrated that the Wehrmacht, despite its reputation for military excellence, could be outfought, outmaneuvered, and destroyed by a determined and competent adversary. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad validated the enormous sacrifices of 1941 and 1942. The Red Army's ability to absorb catastrophic losses, learn from defeat, and emerge stronger proved decisive. Soviet industrial capacity, relocated beyond the reach of German bombers, produced the tanks, artillery, and aircraft necessary to sustain multi-year attritional warfare. The Soviet system, brutal and repressive though it was, proved capable of mobilizing resources and manpower on a scale Germany could not match. For Germany, Stalingrad was the beginning of the end. The loss of the Sixth Army shattered German strategic plans in the east. The Wehrmacht would never regain the initiative. German forces would continue fighting with skill and determination, but they were now reacting to Soviet offensives rather than dictating the tempo of operations. The road from Stalingrad led inexorably to Berlin. The human cost of Stalingrad is almost incomprehensible. 2 million soldiers fought in and around the city over 200 days. Hundreds of thousands died. The city itself was obliterated. The survivors, German prisoners marching into Soviet captivity, Soviet soldiers limping through the ruins, carried physical and psychological scars for the rest of their lives. Stalingrad became synonymous with the brutality of the Eastern Front, a reminder that modern industrial warfare, combined with totalitarian ideology, produces suffering on a scale previously unimaginable. Today, Stalingrad, renamed Volgograd in 1961 during de-Stalinization, though the name was briefly restored for commemorative purposes, stands as a memorial to those who fought and died there. The Mamiev Kurgan Memorial Complex, dominated by the towering statue "The Motherland Calls," honors Soviet defenders. Pavlov's house has been preserved. Visitors walk through reconstructed streets and imagine the hell that once consumed this city. The battle is remembered in Russia as one of the defining moments of the Great Patriotic War, a symbol of Soviet resilience and ultimate victory over fascism. In the broader narrative of World War II, Stalingrad represents the point of no return. After Stalingrad, Germany's defeat was inevitable. The question was no longer if the Allies would win, but at what cost and how long it would take. Stalingrad broke the Wehrmacht, not just materially, but psychologically. The myth of German invincibility died in the ruins of a city on the Volga River. The Red Army, bloodied but unbroken, began its march westward. The road to Berlin had begun.